The summer sun beat down mercilessly on Dustin Baxter's weathered hat as he guided his horse through the rolling hills of Montana Territory, 1876. The Civil War had been over for 11 years, but Dustin still carried its weight like the saddle on his back. At 32, he had spent more years wandering than he cared to count. Ranch work and cattle drives his only constant companions besides the reliable chestnut mare beneath him. Whiskey Creek came into view as he crested the final hill, a small settlement nestled between grazing land and forest. It wasn't much a general store, saloon, blacksmith, and a dozen modest homes scattered around like playing cards dealt by a careless hand. But it might offer work, and that was all Dustin needed. He hadn't planned to stop at the cemetery that sat on the outskirts of town. The small plot of land surrounded by a weathered wooden fence seemed a silent guardian of the settlement's history. But something caught his eye, a splash of color amid the dry grass and gray stones. A woman in a faded blue dress knelt before a grave marker, gently placing wildflowers around its base. Dustin slowed his horse, intending to pass respectfully, but the mare had other ideas. She nickered softly and veered toward the cemetery gate of her own accord. "Easy, Penny," Dustin murmured, but found himself following the horse's lead, dismounting and tying her reins to the fence post. The woman hadn't noticed him yet. Her slender hands moved with purpose, arranging purple and yellow blooms in a careful pattern. Her dark hair was gathered at the nape of her neck, and even from behind, Dustin could see how her shoulders trembled slightly. He removed his hat, uncertain why he'd stopped but knowing he couldn't simply ride on. "Afternoon, madam," he said softly, keeping a respectful distance. She startled, turning quickly to reveal a face both beautiful and sorrowful. Tear stains marked her cheeks, but her eyes, a deep blue like the Montana sky, flashed with momentary alarm before settling into cautious acknowledgement. "Forgive me," Dustin said quickly. "Didn't mean to frighten you." "You didn't," she replied, though her hand pressed against her heart suggested otherwise. "Well, perhaps a little." She glanced at the flowers she'd been arranging. "I wasn't expecting company." "I can leave you to your no," she said, surprising them both with the quickness of her response. "That is." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's just nice to see a new face in Whiskey Creek." Dustin nodded, taking a careful step forward. "Name's Dustin Baxter, madam. Just passing through. Beatrice Norwood," she offered, "though most folks call me B." Her eyes drifted back to the gravestone. Widow Norwood these days. The stone was simple but well carved. "Thomas Norwood, 1849–1875, beloved husband. I'm sorry for your loss," Dustin said, the words inadequate but sincere. "Thank you." B's fingers traced the edge of a vibrant purple aster she'd just placed. "It's been almost a year now. Typhoid took him and several others in town." She gestured to a few neighboring graves. "But life goes on, doesn't it? Whether we're ready or not." Dustin knew that truth better than most. "That it does, madam." She wiped her hands on her apron and stood. He estimated her to be in her mid-20s with a graceful strength about her despite her grief. "Those are mighty pretty flowers," he said, nodding toward her arrangement. A small smile touched her lips. "Thank you. I grow them myself. Started a garden behind my house after Tom died. Seemed important to bring something beautiful into the world." Her cheeks colored slightly. "That probably sounds foolish." "Not at all," Dustin replied. "After all I've seen, beauty's about the only thing that makes sense anymore." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who understood loss. "May I?" Dustin asked, gesturing to the remaining flowers in her basket. Bee hesitated, then nodded. Dustin knelt beside her and began carefully placing blooms around the stone. His large, calloused hands looked awkward next to her delicate fingers, but he worked with surprising gentleness. "Did you serve?" Bee asked quietly. "In the war, I mean." Dustin nodded without looking up. "Union cavalry, 4 years that felt like 40. My father and brother both fought." "Father came home, brother didn't." They worked in silence after that, completing the floral tribute together. When they finished, Bea stood back and studied their work. "It's beautiful," she said. "Thank you, Mr. Baxter. Dustin, please." He replaced his hat and nodded toward town. "Are you heading back now? I'd be happy to escort you." "That's kind, but unnecessary." Bea gathered her empty basket. "Whiskey Creek isn't big enough to get lost in, and everyone knows me." "All the same, if you don't mind the company," something in her expression softened. "Actually, I've been alone with my thoughts quite enough today. Company would be welcome." They walked side by side, Dustin leading his horse down the dirt road toward town. The afternoon had begun to cool, and shadows stretched long across the ground. "What brings you to our little settlement?" Bea asked. "Work, mainly. Been moving from ranch to ranch since the war ended. Figured I'd see if anyone around here needs an extra hand." "As a matter of fact," Bea said slowly, "my place could use some attention. After Tom died, I've managed to keep up the house and a small vegetable garden, but the barn is falling into disrepair, and the north pasture fence needs mending." Dustin glanced at her, surprised. "You offering me work, Mrs. Norwood?" "I am," she replied with unexpected firmness. "It's not charity. Tom and I had a small cattle operation. Just 20 head now, but enough that I can pay fair wages. The bank's been suggesting I sell, but—" Her chin lifted stubbornly. "This land was our dream. I'm not ready to give up on it." They reached the edge of town, where curious eyes watched the widow walking alongside a stranger. Dustin was acutely aware of how this might appear, but Bea seemed unconcerned by the attention. "I can't promise to stay long," he warned her. "I'm not asking for promises, Mr. Baxter. Just honest work for honest pay." She pointed down a side road. "My place is about half a mile that way. You can see it for yourself before deciding." The Norwood Ranch was modest but well situated on a rise overlooking a creek. The two-story house showed signs of careful maintenance, with a wrap-around porch and climbing roses that had begun their summer bloom. Behind it stood a barn that, as Bea had suggested, needed attention, its roof sagging in one corner, weather-beaten boards pulling away from the frame. "It's not much compared to the big spreads," Bea said as they approached, "but it's home." "It's a fine place," Dustin replied honestly. A brown and white border collie came bounding from behind the house, barking enthusiastically at their approach. "That's Patches," Bea said with a genuine smile, the first unguarded expression Dustin had seen from her. "Best cattle dog in the territory, according to my husband." Dustin dismounted as the dog circled them excitedly. "Good boy," he murmured, letting Patches sniff his hand before giving him a scratch behind the ears. Bea led him around the property, pointing out the work that needed doing. The list was substantial. The barn roof, several sections of fence, a water pump that barely functioned, and a horse stall that needed rebuilding. As twilight approached, Dustin realized he'd already made his decision. "I can start tomorrow if that suits," he said finally. Relief washed over Bea's face. "That would be perfect. There's a room above the barn. It's small but clean. Unless you'd prefer to stay in town." "The barn will do fine," Dustin replied. He'd slept in far worse places. "Good, then let's discuss terms." Bea's businesslike tone suggested she was not one to be taken advantage of, widow or not. They agreed on fair wages and a month's work to start, with an understanding that either could end the arrangement with 3 days' notice. As darkness fell, Bea invited him to supper, a simple but hearty meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee that they ate at her kitchen table. "Where are you from originally, Mr. Baxter?" she asked as they ate. "Pennsylvania, farm country outside Philadelphia." He took a sip of coffee. "And you?" "Your accent suggests somewhere further east." "Boston, originally. My father was a professor at Harvard. Tom was his student." A fond memory crossed her face. "Father was scandalized when we married. Tom was studying literature but dreamed of the West. Father thought him impractical." "And you?" "I thought him brave." She gazed out the window toward the darkened pasture. "Still do." After supper, Dustin excused himself to settle into the barn room. It was indeed small but clean, with a narrow bed, a chest for his few belongings, and a window that overlooked the creek. He sat on the edge of the bed, contemplating the unexpected turn his journey had taken. He'd meant to stay only a night in Whiskey Creek before moving on. Now, he'd committed to a month helping a widow with deep blue eyes and a garden of wildflowers. It wasn't his usual way, but as he listened to the water rushing in the creek below, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the tentative pull of roots wanting to take hold. Dustin rose with the sun the next morning and set to work examining the barn roof. By the time Bea emerged from the house, he'd already determined what needed replacing and had begun pulling down the damaged sections. "You're an early riser," she called up to him. "Force of habit," he replied, climbing down the ladder he'd found in the barn. "Coffee smells mighty good." She handed him a steaming mug. "Breakfast is ready when you are, nothing fancy, just flapjacks and bacon." "Sounds perfect." He took a grateful sip. "After that, I'll need to make a trip into town for supplies. Your barn roof needs more than patching," Bea nodded. "Take the wagon." "I've credit at the general store." "I saw some wild roses growing near the creek," Dustin said, surprising himself. "Would you mind if I dug up a few to transplant? Might look nice along the front of the barn once it's fixed up." Something flickered in Bea's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or pleasure. "You know about gardening. My mother kept roses, taught me a thing or two before she passed." Bea studied him with newfound interest. "I think that would be lovely. The barn could use some beautifying." After breakfast, Dustin drove the wagon into Whiskey Creek. The general store was run by a portly man named Harold Wilson, whose curious gaze followed Dustin as he selected lumber and shingles. "You're staying at the Norwood place?" Wilson asked as he tallied the purchases. "Working there, yes." Wilson nodded slowly. "Bea's good people. Had a rough go of it since Tom passed. Whole town's been worried about her." His eyes narrowed slightly. "She's well respected here." Dustin recognized the warning for what it was, as she should be. "I'm just helping with repairs, Mr. Wilson." "Good, good." Wilson's expression relaxed marginally. "Just so we understand each other, that'll be $8.40 for the supplies. Mrs. Norwood said she has credit here." "She does indeed." Wilson made a notation in his ledger. "Tom Norwood never left a debt unpaid, and his widow's the same." "Tell her Harold says hello, would you?" On his way back to the ranch, Dustin passed the cemetery again. He stopped the wagon and walked to Thomas Norwood's grave. The flowers he and Bea had placed the day before were still vibrant against the gray stone. "I'll look after things for a while," Dustin said quietly to the marker. No disrespect intended. The next 2 weeks fell into a rhythm. Dustin worked from dawn to dusk, repairing the barn roof, rebuilding the horse stall, and beginning the fence mending. Bea tended her gardens, both flowers and vegetables, and looked after the cattle with Patch's help. They took meals together, their conversations gradually becoming easier, more comfortable. Dustin learned that Bea had been married for just 3 years before losing Tom. That she loved poetry and often read by lamplight in the evenings. That despite her gentle appearance, she could ride as well as any man and wasn't afraid of hard work. Bea discovered that Dustin played the harmonica, though he was reluctant to demonstrate until she insisted one evening after supper. That he had a younger sister in Philadelphia whom he wrote to monthly. That despite his quiet nature, he possessed a dry wit that occasionally surfaced when he felt at ease. One afternoon, as Dustin worked on the fence in the north pasture, a summer thunderstorm rolled in with startling speed. Lightning cracked across the sky, followed by a deluge that soaked him instantly. He gathered his tools and ran for the barn, arriving drenched and breathless. Bea was already inside, having brought in the laundry from the line just before the rain hit. She laughed at the sight of him, water streaming from his hat brim. "You look like you went swimming with your clothes on," she said, handing him a towel. "Feel like it too." Dustin removed his hat and wiped his face. "This is some storm." They stood in the barn doorway, watching the rain transform the landscape. The scent of wet earth filled the air, and the temperature dropped pleasantly after the day's heat. "I've always loved storms," Bee said, wrapping her arms around herself. "Tom used to say I was born during one, and that's why they never frightened me." "Were you born during a storm?" she smiled. "No, it was a perfectly clear December day, according to my mother, but I liked Tom's version better." Thunder boomed overhead, and a particularly bright flash of lightning illuminated the yard. Patches whined from where he'd taken shelter under a workbench. "Poor boy never did like thunder," Bee said. She knelt to comfort the dog, and Dustin found himself watching the gentle way she stroked his fur, murmuring reassurances. "You have a way with creatures," he observed. "Plants, too. Everything seems to respond to your touch." Bee looked up, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "I just treat them kindly. Most living things want the same things, don't they? Care, attention, a gentle hand." Their eyes held for a moment longer than usual, and Dustin felt something shift between them, a recognition of feelings he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge. The storm passed as quickly as it had arrived, leaving behind puddles that reflected the returning sunlight. Bee stood, brushing dog hair from her skirt. "I should get back to the house," she said, her voice slightly breathless. "Supper won't cook itself." "Bee," Dustin said, stopping her as she turned to leave. "I've been thinking, the wild roses I transplanted are taking well. Maybe we could expand the flower beds around the house too. Give you more blooms to take to," he paused, suddenly uncertain. "To Tom's grave," she finished softly. "That's thoughtful of you, Dustin." It was the first time she'd used his given name without the formal Mr. Baxter attached, and the sound of it in her voice warmed him more than he cared to admit. "I just thought it might be nice," he said. "The house deserves as much attention as the barn." Bee's smile reached her eyes this time. "I'd like that very much." As promised, the following day they began expanding the flower beds. Dustin dug new borders while Bee decided which flowers to transplant from her existing gardens. They worked side by side, their hands occasionally brushing as they moved plants or arranged stones along the edges. "These daisies need more sun than they're getting by the fence," Bee explained, carefully lifting a cluster with their roots intact. "And the columbine would look lovely here by the porch steps." Dustin marveled at her knowledge. "You've learned a lot about flowers in a short time." "I had a good teacher," she replied, sitting back on her heels. "After Tom died, our neighbor Mrs. Erickson brought me seed packets and cuttings. Said I needed something to nurture." Her expression turned distant. "I thought she was just being kind, but she was right. The flowers saved me in a way, gave me purpose when I felt most lost." Dustin nodded, understanding perfectly. "After the war, I couldn't settle anywhere. Kept moving, taking odd jobs. Nothing felt right." He patted soil around a transplanted foxglove. "Working with horses helped some. They don't judge a man for what he's seen or done." "And now," Bee asked quietly, "does anything feel right now?" Their eyes met over the freshly turned earth, and Dustin couldn't bring himself to look away. "Some things are beginning to," he admitted. The moment hung between them, fragile as a butterfly's wing, until Patches barked at a passing rabbit and broke the spell. Bee returned to her planting, but Dustin noticed the color in her cheeks and the small smile she couldn't quite suppress. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies rise from the grass, Dustin felt a contentment he'd nearly forgotten was possible. Bee rocked gently in a wooden chair beside him, humming a tune he didn't recognize. "What's that song?" he asked. "Just an old lullaby my mother used to sing." She looked embarrassed. "I didn't realize I was humming out loud. It's nice, peaceful." Bee's rocking slowed. "Dustin, may I ask you something personal?" He nodded, though wariness crept into his posture. "You've been here nearly 3 weeks now. The barn roof is fixed, the horse stall rebuilt, and the fence is almost done. I've been wondering, will you move on when the month is up?" The question had been lingering in his own mind. "I'm not sure," he answered honestly. "Would you want me to stay?" Bee's fingers twisted in her lap. "The work has gone faster than I expected, but there's still plenty to do. The vegetable garden needs expanding if I'm to preserve enough for winter. and the cattle will need tending through fall roundup. Dustin recognized the practical reasons she offered, but he also heard what remained unspoken. If you'd like me to stay on, I'd be agreeable to that. Relief softened her features. Good, that's good. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the chorus of crickets and the occasional distant lowing of cattle. I visit his grave every Sunday, Bea said suddenly. It started as a duty, but now I think I go as much for myself as for him, to remind myself that life continues. She turned to face Dustin directly. Would you think it strange if I said I feel more alive in the cemetery than anywhere else? Not strange at all, Dustin replied. Some places hold more truth than others. Yes, she whispered. That's exactly it. The following Sunday, Dustin didn't ask to accompany Bea to the cemetery. Instead, he focused on finishing the north pasture fence, giving her the privacy he sensed she needed. When she returned in the afternoon, her eyes were clear, her step lighter than when she'd left. I told Tom about the flowers we planted, she said as she joined Dustin by the fence, and about the barn repairs. I think he would be pleased. Dustin drove a final nail into the fence post. I hope so. He would like you, Bea continued, gazing out across the pasture. He valued honesty and hard work above all else. Sounds like a good man, the best I've known. She looked at Dustin directly. Until recently. The words hung in the air between them, charged with meaning. Dustin set down his hammer, uncertain how to respond. Bea, you don't need to say anything, she interrupted gently. I just wanted you to know that I see the goodness in you, Dustin Baxter, even if you don't always see it yourself. Before he could respond, she turned and walked back toward the house, leaving him with thoughts as tangled as brambles. That night, a fierce windstorm blew in from the mountains. The newly repaired barn withstood the gale, but a massive pine tree near the house succumbed, crashing onto the rear portion of the roof. The sound jolted Dustin from sleep, and he ran from the barn to find Bea already outside in her nightgown and shawl, staring up at the damage. Are you hurt? He shouted over the wind. She shook her head, clutching her shawl tighter. It hit the back bedroom. I was in the front room reading. Dustin surveyed the damage. The tree had punched through the roof and rain was already pouring into the house. We need to cover that before the whole place floods. Working together in the howling wind, they managed to secure a tarpaulin over the worst of the damage. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving behind a clear sky that belied the night's chaos. It could have been worse, Bea said as they assessed the situation in daylight. The structure seems sound, just the roof and that back wall need repair. Dustin nodded, calculating what would be needed. I'll head into town for supplies. We should be able to fix this within a week. Bea repeated softly. There was a time I would have faced this alone. Not anymore, Dustin said without thinking. Then more cautiously, that is, if you want my help. I do. Her hand found his, a brief touch that sent warmth coursing through him despite the morning chill. More than you know. The tree damage forced new sleeping arrangements. With the back bedroom exposed to the elements, Bea moved her belongings to the front parlor. She offered Dustin the sofa rather than the barn room, at least until the repairs were complete. It's not proper, he protested. Propriety seems less important than practicality right now, Bea replied. Besides, the whole town already has us married off in their gossip. We might as well be comfortable while they talk. Dustin laughed despite himself. They do they? Oh yes, Mrs. Wilson told me quite directly that she approved of my arrangement with you, though she suggested we might consider making it official before winter. Bea's cheeks colored as she relayed this, but she met his eyes steadily. And what did you tell her? Dustin asked, his heart beating faster than he'd like to admit, that my arrangements were my own business. She busied herself with arranging blankets on the sofa. Though I didn't say I disagreed with her assessment, Dustin stood frozen, unsure how to navigate this new territory between them. Bea saved him from responding by changing the subject. Supper's almost ready. I hope you like stew. The roof repairs proceeded quickly, with Dustin working from dawn until dusk each day. Bee insisted on helping, learning to hammer shingles and mix plaster for the interior wall repairs. By the end of the week, the bedroom was weathertight again, though still needing paint and new curtains. "You're a quick study," Dustin observed as Bee smoothed plaster over the last section of repaired wall. "I've always believed a person can learn anything if properly motivated." She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of white. "And having a roof that doesn't leak seems proper motivation." Dustin smiled, reaching out to brush the plaster from her skin. The touch lingered, his fingers tracing the curve of her cheek. Bee's breath caught, but she didn't pull away. "You have plaster everywhere," he murmured, though it was no longer about the smudge. "Do I?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. He nodded, his hand still cradling her face. Slowly, giving her every chance to step away, Dustin leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, and over almost before it began. Bee's eyes remained closed for a moment after he pulled back. When she opened them, they held a mixture of surprise and something deeper, more complex. "I'm sorry," Dustin said immediately. "Don't apologize," Bee interrupted. "Please." Her hand covered his where it still rested against her cheek. "I've been wondering what that would feel like." "And?" he asked, scarcely breathing. "Like spring after a long winter," she whispered, and this time it was she who leaned forward, meeting his lips with newfound courage. The kiss deepened, months of unspoken feelings finally finding expression. When they eventually parted, both were breathless. "I never expected to feel this way again," Bee admitted. "After Tom died, I thought that part of my life was over." Dustin brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I never expected to feel this way at all." That night they talked until the oil lamp burned low. Bee spoke of her life with Tom, their dreams for the ranch, and how completely his death had shattered her world. Dustin shared stories of the war he rarely discussed, the friends lost, the horrors witnessed, and the emptiness that had followed him home. "I've been running for 11 years, he confessed. "Not just from place to place, but from myself, from feeling anything too deeply." Bee's hand found his in the dimming light. "And now I find myself wanting to stay, to build something lasting." He squeezed her fingers gently. "If you'll have me, I will," she said simply. "But Dustin, I need you to understand something. I loved Tom deeply. That won't ever change." "I wouldn't want it to," he replied honestly. "Your love for him is part of who you are. I don't aim to replace those memories, just to create new ones alongside them." Tears welled in Bee's eyes. "How did you become so wise, Cowboy?" "Not wisdom," he said, wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Just learning, same as your flowers. Growing toward the light instead of away from the dark." October brought with it the cattle roundup. With Dustin's help and Patch's enthusiastic herding, they brought in all 20 head, plus 4 new calves born during the summer. The additional income from the calves meant they could afford to hire temporary help from town for the fall harvest, bringing in the vegetables Bee had carefully tended. As the first frost approached, Dustin and Bee spent long evenings preserving food for winter, canning vegetables, smoking meat, and storing apples in the root cellar. Their hands worked in practiced harmony, their conversation flowing easily between practical matters and deeper subjects. "I received a letter from my sister today," Dustin mentioned as they sealed jars of green beans. "She's invited me to Philadelphia for Christmas." Bee's hands stilled momentarily. "Will you go?" I wrote back, suggesting something else. He looked up from his work. "I invited her here instead." "If that's agreeable to you." The smile that lit Bee's face was answer enough. "I'd love to meet her." "There's something else I've been meaning to ask you," Dustin said, setting aside the jar he'd been labeling. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object wrapped in cloth. Bee watched with widening eyes as he unwrapped it to reveal a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," he explained. "My sister sent it when I wrote to her about you, Dustin." Bee's voice caught. "I know it's soon," he continued hurriedly, "and if you need more time, I understand. But I love you, Bee Norwood. I want to build a life with you to help this ranch thrive, to wake up beside you every morning and plant flowers with you every spring." Tears spilled down Bee's cheeks as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Finally, she whispered, "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married on a crisp November day, with the entire town of Whiskey Creek in attendance. Harold Wilson hosted the reception at the general store, and even the banker who had pressured Bee to sell raised a toast to the couple's future prosperity. Before the ceremony, Bee had visited Tom's grave one last time as his widow. Dustin accompanied her but gave her space, watching from a distance as she placed a bouquet of the last autumn blooms on the stone. "I'll always love you," he heard her say softly to the marker. "But I've found room in my heart for new love too. I think you'd be happy for me." When she returned to Dustin's side, her eyes were clear and her smile genuine. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. "Ready," she confirmed, taking it firmly. That evening, as they stood on the porch of what was now their home together, Dustin marveled at the journey that had brought him there. "What are you thinking about?" Bee asked, leaning into his embrace. "Just that I never planned to stop that day." If Penny hadn't veered toward the cemetery gate. "I believe some things are meant to be," Bee said softly, "like wildflowers that grow where you least expect them." Dustin pressed a kiss to her temple. "I'm glad I stayed to help plant them." "And I'm glad you stayed to help me bloom again," she whispered back. Spring arrived with a riot of color, the flower beds they had planted together bursting with new life. Bee's garden had expanded to include vegetables for the coming year and flowers in abundance enough to decorate their home, to take to Tom's grave each Sunday, and to share with neighbors. On a warm May morning, exactly 1 year after Dustin had first ridden into Whiskey Creek, they stood together in the cemetery, planting fresh flowers around not just Tom's grave, but others that had been neglected. "I've been thinking," Bee said as she patted soil around a young rosebush. "This place could use more care. Maybe we could set aside time each month to tend all the graves, not just Tom's." Dustin nodded, understanding the healing that came from such acts of tenderness. "I think that's a fine idea." "And perhaps," she added with a mysterious smile, "in a few years we could bring our children here. Teach them about remembrance and renewal." Dustin's hands stilled in the earth. "Children?" Bee's smile widened as she took his soil-covered hand and placed it gently against her stomach. "I wasn't certain until yesterday, but Dr. Miller confirmed it. By Christmas, there will be 3 of us." Joy unlike anything Dustin had ever known surged through him. He gathered Bee in his arms, mindful of her condition, and kissed her beneath the Montana sky. "From flowers in a graveyard to new life," he murmured against her hair. "Who would have thought?" "I would," Bee replied, her eyes shining with tears of happiness. "Life always finds a way to bloom again, Dustin. Sometimes it just needs a helping hand." Together, they walked hand in hand from the cemetery toward home, leaving behind rows of tended graves bright with spring flowers, symbols of remembrance, renewal, and the unexpected pathways of love.